We are live. I see some attendees filtering in. All right, we are getting some attendees filtering in here, so let's give it a second while people log in. All right. Still, people are filtering in here, so that's good. It's 7:01, so we're still just getting started. All right. Well, I'm sure people will filter in as we go through the presentation this evening. Jacob, do you see any issue with us getting rolling here?
Let's get started.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to attend our webinar presentation this evening on the 2050 Mount Pleasant Master Plan. My name is Paul Lippens. I'm a vice president with McKenna. McKenna is the consulting planner for the Mount Pleasant 2015 Master Plan. I'm here tonight with Jacob Kane, the City of Mount Pleasant's city planner, and our consulting team, Laura Haw, Chris Corey, both McKenna leadership people, and our partner, Adam Cook, from Seamless Collaborative, who's a valuable partner, close collaborator with us, and has been a great participant in the process. He was our charrette manager as well. So this evening, we're going to give you a presentation, and Jacob is going to start off here with a little bit of background. This is an interactive presentation. We're going to do some discussion. Really hope this is fun, and we are scheduled for an hour and a half, so we're going to try to stay to our time limit here. Jacob, I'm going to go ahead and share the presentation. How does that sound?
Perfect.
All right.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Paul. Appreciate seeing a lot of familiar faces logged in to join us this evening. As Paul said, I'm Jacob Kane. I am the city planner for the City of Mount Pleasant, and I am excited to welcome you to our virtual open house for the city's proposed 2050 master plan.
Hold on a second. Got to make sure I'm sharing the right screen here. There we go. All right, we're in there.
Thank you, Paul. So tonight we are here to discuss and help the community learn more about our proposed 2050 master plan. You're probably asking yourselves, why am I here? How did I get here? City of Mount Pleasant has a long history of planning and creating master plans going back to the 1940s. Our current master plan was adopted in 2014. Since then, a lot has changed. In March of 2018, our Planning Commission voted to move forward with the creation of a new master plan. That caused us to seek out a consultant to work with us, and we hired McKenna to work on our new master plan. In April 2019, hundreds of community members joined us either in person in a week-long charrette event at City Hall or by participating in online surveys to provide public feedback on what they wanted to see in the future in Mount Pleasant. That feedback was the basis for the plan that we're here to present this evening. That draft plan was ultimately developed and made available to the public for the first time in the fall of 2019. As you all know, in 2020, we faced a number of challenges in our society, one of which is the ability to hold in-person events. We initially had hoped to join together in person in the spring of 2020 to introduce this plan to the community, but we were unable to do so. So the bad news is we had to cancel some events that we had planned. Good news is I will tell you that this is a very exciting technology, and I think that the event tonight is going to be even better than what we had planned to do in person. So tonight's event is one of two virtual events that we'll be holding this month. Our second virtual event is a 2-week-long interactive website that's available at mtpleasant2050.com. So I'd encourage you, if you haven't already, to check that website out. You can take a guided tour through our proposed master plan, learn more about the process, and provide your feedback. At the end of tonight's presentation, we're going to show you a little bit more about what that guided tour looks like. After tonight, our next steps, as I mentioned, that interactive web tool is going to remain available through Monday, August 31st. The Parks and Recreation Commission will be hosting the first public hearing on the proposed plan on September 22nd. That'll be followed by a Planning Commission public hearing on Thursday, October 1st. And finally, we anticipate that the City Commission will hold a public hearing on the proposed master plan and be in the position to consider adoption of the plan on Monday, November the 9th. We've been working on this plan for a long time, and with the COVID-19 situation, we did have a slight delay in our schedule. We are nearing the end of the process. As I mentioned, we began back in April of 2019 with a week-long public engagement event. Subsequently, we've had several presentations to our boards and commissions on the draft plan as it's been developed into the 100% draft plan that's available tonight. We're looking forward to hearing more from the public about your reactions to this proposed plan and moving it forward through the adoption process, and then ultimately into the implementation process where we can begin to take actions to bring this plan into fruition. So with that, I'm going to turn things back over to Paul Lippens and let him walk you through the master plan.
Thanks, Jacob. Let me start my video here. All right. So as I get started here, first I'd like to spend a minute on what is a master plan. For those of you participating in this, maybe you already have a good idea. But really, the master plan process is designed to articulate community desires to form goals and objectives, understand the different potential alternatives moving forward, develop a local consensus on strategies, and then ultimately adopt the plan so it becomes a part of the city's official policy. The plan is intended to inspire action, and I think most importantly, it's intended to be reviewed and updated. In the state of Michigan, it's required to be reviewed and updated every 5 years. As Jacob mentioned, the last master plan in Mount Pleasant was adopted in 2014. This master plan process was designed to incorporate a charrette as the primary function for developing those alternatives and formulating a consensus. That charrette was held last April, a year ago, April. And a charrette is designed to have those feedback loops. So let's work together, provide that feedback, and then once we get that feedback, let's incorporate it, let's change it, develop a preferred alternative, and then advance that preferred alternative at the process. We had a lot of great participation and a lot of fun at that charrette, and really appreciate everyone involved. So it's important to understand, though, the master plan is a policy document, whereas a zoning ordinance is actually a regulation that's enforceable. So while the master plan is related to zoning, it's not necessarily the regulations that apply today. Master plan is a long-range document, whereas the zoning ordinance is immediate. The master plan provides guidance on how to interpret regulations and how to create regulations, whereas the zoning ordinance are actually those regulations. And we like to characterize the master plan as policy. So it has a broader reach than zoning and can be used to interpret multiple decisions by all sorts of decision makers, but most importantly, the Parks Commission, the Planning Commission, the Downtown Development Authority, and the City Commission, who were really involved in this process after the charrette in guiding the plan's development and affirming what was developed during the charrette. So while the master plan is a policy, the zoning code is a regulation and it's enforced. We did a lot of thinking about the zoning code as part of this process. And as I mentioned, the plan is supposed to be updated every 5 years, and Mount Pleasant has been on that schedule. So I'd like to summarize the plan. And tonight, my summary is really going to focus on just the high points for each of the books in the plan, and then dialing in on that 1 to 3 year implementation objectives. The objectives that were identified for the first 3 years of the plan are really the most relevant and things that we'd like feedback on as part of our 63-day, the end of the 63-day review period. We're going to provide some context about past, present, and future plans for the city. Adam is going to lead a presentation on that, and he's going to discuss a little bit about how plans are being implemented during the COVID-19 pandemic as well. My colleague Chris is going to share with you the tour of the interactive master plan website that we developed as that second virtual opportunity to provide feedback that Jacob mentioned. And then my colleague Laura is going to lead a facilitated discussion. So there will actually be an opportunity this evening for you to talk to us at the end of this presentation, ask questions, and have a discussion about the 2050 master plan. I did want to mention, following the presentation, when you click out of this, you'll be directed to an online survey, which is a part of the online virtual feedback we're seeking this month. If you don't have time to take that survey now, don't worry about it, just click out. Please come back and take it another time. And Chris is also going to show you how we've linked that survey to the interactive website. So what is in the plan? We've got 5 books here. The first book is Sustainable Land Use, which answers the question, how should we grow? How should Mount Pleasant grow? The second book is Connected Mobility System, which defines how we should get there. The third book, Focused Redevelopment, where we should grow. The fourth book, Exceptional Parks and Public Spaces, where we should play. And the last book, Innovative Services and Aspirations, what we should do now. So I'm going to describe that, but first, let's do a Zoom poll. Where's my people at? All right.
Zoom poll.
There you go, Jacob and Chris. I'm trying to get everyone to have a little fun with this. It's really important that we get to know a little bit about the audience. So I'm going to do a little poll. So in a minute here, I'm going to relaunch the polling. And you should now see a poll. So this poll is going to ask a few questions. And if you're participating, you should have the ability now to answer these questions. We'd like to get a sense of who's in the audience. So the first question is, what about the experience of the pandemic? Oh, I'm doing the wrong one. I'm the wrong one. I'm going to end this. Sorry, we're going to relaunch that later. Relaunch polling. Continue. No, end polling. Sorry. First poll is getting to know you. All right. Sorry, everyone. I'm going to ask you to start from the top. Were you able to attend any of the previous 2050 master plan meetings or events? I'm going to read through all these questions, and hopefully everyone in the audience can answer them as we go. The second question we have for you tonight is, where do you live in the Mount Pleasant area? The third question we have, how long have you lived in the Mount Pleasant area? The fourth question, the Mount Pleasant 2050 master plan consists of 5 key sections, which I previously presented, but they're book 5, Sustainable Land Use, Connected Mobility Systems, Focused Redevelopment, Exceptional Parks and Public Spaces, Innovative Services and Aspiration. And then, of course, you can say all of the books are important to me. So right now, we have 13 people who are voting, and I've had 6 of those people vote. So if you haven't cast your vote, please do. Now I have 8 of the 13 people have voted, 9 of the 13 people have voted, 10, 11, almost there. I think the last 2 may actually be our panelists this evening, so I'm going to go ahead with 13. And I'm ending the polling. So these are the results. I'm going to share the results now. 80% of the people participating tonight have participated in the master plan, and that's great. Thanks for coming back and spending some time with us this evening. I think it's a good follow-up, and we're happy you're here. 2 people, this is the first year learning, so we're really excited you came. As Jacob shared, we've been working on this for a while. but it's equally important for you to be here tonight. We do have a couple participants from outside of the county, one from Union Township, one from Isabella, and the rest of the people here this evening are from the city. How long have you lived in the Mount Pleasant area? We have 6 people who have lived here for 20 years or more. That's great, and it shows it's consistent with what we heard about residents in the city really enjoying the quality of life and wanting to stay for a long time. And then we have a number of people in the other years as well. And then finally, which sections are you here? 70% said all of the sections are equally important, so thank you. We do have a couple people that are more specifically focused around parks and focused redevelopment. So we're going to get to all of that. And thank you for participating in the poll. And give me a second here while I click out of polls, and I'm going to go back into the presentation. Okay. Here we go. All right, back to the presentation. So I'm going to give you a brief rundown of some of the high points for each of these sections. Book 1, Sustainable Land Use, focuses around the future land use plan for the city. The future land use plan is where we express the vision for land development. And one of the specific things we created in this plan was a series of mixed use categories that were really intended to help implement the zoning code and provide some more details on that zoning code policy. Our findings were based on the significant input provided in the public charrette. And as I mentioned, they support the city's form-based code. They preserve the existing neighborhoods. We've worked to reimagine and re-envision possibilities for Mission Street, both from a land development perspective and from a transportation perspective. Retrofitting the roads for bikes and walkers, promoting job opportunities, economic vitality, and continuing to promote downtown as well as parks and open space connections. We're going to have a bit more later when we talk about missing middle housing, but I think one of the key things that came out was that having an opportunity for more types of housing integrated within the community and as permitted by the zoning ordinance was high on everybody's minds. And looking at the 1 to 3 objectives, your 1 to 3 objectives, encouraging redevelopment within walkable and bikeable distances, improving landscape aesthetics and entryways within neighborhoods and business areas, encouraging a greater variety mix of housing types within neighborhoods, and enabling the adaptive reuse of structures to preserve historic buildings. These are really the near-term objectives that the plan highlights for year 1 to 4, year 1 to 3 in terms of our land use objectives. Book 2, Connected Mobility Systems, presents the Future Transportation Plan. The Future Transportation Plan really deals with public right-of-way and improvements for the vehicle, transit, walking, biking, and how roadways can be designed and implemented to support all modes with a focus on connecting to places. So the system of neighborhood centers that highlights both the civic center areas around the campus, downtown, and the Mission Street area, as well as transitional areas between the city. Some of the highlights to the Future Transportation Plan, supporting updates for Mission Street, including access management and the creation of new connections, which the city's been working on with the DDA for some time. Ideas for improving citywide circulation, creating more connections to US 127 and rerouting M20 are some important objectives. And then for year 1 through 3, we looked at supporting neighborhood traffic calming measures as an important objective, maintaining roadway network and consistently evaluating system operations, partnering with MDOT and CMU to reimagine Mission Street. And here I would also say that just doing this plan has provided the initial start for this objective, because we met several times with MDOT and CMU, and I think both of those agencies are going to be essential to implementing the plan. So we're happy to get that conversation started as part of this planning process. Retrofitting the roadway network to provide safe accommodations for pedestrians and bicyclists, and then expanding public transit opportunities. Book 3 focuses on redevelopment. Some of the high points for the redevelopment part of the plan was focusing on walkability and understanding the concept of pedestrian sheds. So when you do a new development, new redevelopment, how does that really connect to neighborhoods and connect to parks and provide that enhanced walkability that the city is seeking? So we did create a map that kind of coordinates where those neighborhood centers would be, as well as the regional centers of downtown and the Mission Street area. And you see here, looking at that walkability pedestrian sheds, those areas really are kind of separate draws from a walkability perspective and can exist within the city together in a complementary fashion. Here's a rendering. One of the exciting things, and we learned that the City Commission is taking some initial steps to move forward with the idea of reinventing the town center. Really what we're looking for is kind of, even if it's through creating more flexible, programmable spaces, but rethinking the part of that important site that's dedicated to parking, to allow both parking, continue to allow parking, but also neighborhood gathering, places to allow programmable activities, and then potentially expanding downtown housing options. We know that the city and downtown has a lot of really great businesses, and really think that this is an opportunity to expand, particularly on housing in downtown. We've also done some visioning about how to continue that town and gown relationship and connecting the university to downtown, particularly by enhancing that environment and creating some view terminuses. This is an interesting part of the plan that we encourage you to look at and maybe provide us with some feedback. Year 1 through 3 objectives for redevelopment: promoting economic development that's consistent with the form-based code and aesthetic values. Simple, but something that really needs to be focused on a day-to-day implementation basis. Book 4, exceptional parks and public spaces. This is the city's official Parks and Recreation Master Plan, and it's embedded as part of the 2050 Master Plan document. One of the key things we did is an assessment and inventory of the entire park system, as well as the programming and capital improvements plans that the city is working to development and implement over the life of the plan. Really enjoy things like this, the amenity survey, to understand all of the facilities that are in the city. We had a tremendous response about the city's and the importance of the city's park system and the need to elevate the park system within the city's planning efforts, and really connect it to all of the redevelopment and transportation efforts that the city is undertaking. We found that the facility and service area analysis shows a really good coverage for the neighborhoods within a quarter-mile walk and a half-mile walk or service radii. Most of the city is covered, and we think that's fantastic. There was some talk about making sure that there was cross connections between the east side of the city and the west side of the city across Mission Street. And so that's part of the goal for Mission Street retrofits as well, is to improve that connectivity to the city's valuable park system. Year 1 to 3 objectives for parks: continuing park development and enhancing the improvements and maintenance, developing the Parks and Recreation partnership with the city, township, CMU, schools, and tribe, and then improving and supporting river access and stewardship throughout the city. Book 5, Innovative Services and Aspirations. Some highlights from this is really where this action plan is contained. We've thought through the timing of the objectives and goals of the master plan, including identifying project leads and priorities. This is an example of one of the tables. As I mentioned in our outreach, we're really focusing in on these year 1 through 3 timeframes, because we feel like those are the most important to this master plan. As I mentioned, master plans are updated every 5 years. So the things that are highlighted for 2 and 3 in terms of our time frame are more long-term visions that we even think could be updated, or potentially the vision could change in the next master plan. The important thing about a master plan is that we're providing actionable objectives and policies that are valuable to the city today, and even more importantly, more valuable to the city today than the 2014 master plan that we're updating. So the year 1 through 3 objectives for the master plan: increasing tourism through marketing of the city to draw more to the downtown, enhancing and improving employment opportunities and training, increasing cooperation and coordination between government agencies and other organizations, and improving services and encouraging creation of neighborhoods and organizations. So that's the quick update. I think in a minute, Chris is going to present this interactive website we've developed, which is really a great way for you to explore and become familiar with the plan. But before we do that, my colleague Adam is going to provide a little bit of update. As part of the plan, we did some work to think about all of the history Mount Pleasant has in developing plans, and then how this plan will relate in the future to developing those. So Adam, I'm going to turn it over to you. And thanks everybody for listening to me, and we'll have some more for you in a bit. Adam, take it away.
All right, thank you very much, Paul. Excellent introduction. Again, I want to reiterate how wonderful it is to see so many names, and so many familiar names, as well as new names here on the webinar this evening. And it was a pleasure working with many of you back in April of 2019. I can't believe it's been as long as it has. It seems like it was just yesterday that we did our charrette. And if you were at that charrette, you've probably seen some of the slides I'm about to show you. And I just want to do sort of a quick run through, kind of take what we talked about really on that first night of our charrette and kind of move it forward in light of the work that's come out of that, meaning your draft master plan, as well as, of course, some of the major changes that we've all worked through together here in the year 2020. So really quickly, as you can see, we'll do a little brief historical overview. You can see this sketches Mount Pleasant back in, I believe, the year 1864. So this was a time before master plans. This was when development happened incrementally, and it happened according to sort of long-standing patterns of tradition and development. And one of the interesting things about Mount Pleasant was, unlike many other communities in central Michigan and a lot of parts of the Midwest, where the downtown is on either a range line road or a section line road. And what do I mean by that? See if I can get my little presenter tool to come up. And of course, that's not the one I wanted, but what we're looking at is sort of the main roads that run on mile lines when we're looking at sort of the 1837 Northwest Survey. Mount Pleasant's downtown was not sited on one of those lines. It was sited earlier than that, in fact. It was due to the ideal location of the site for a mill there on the river. And so basically the original town site was right about where Jacob is sitting at City Hall, right where Broadway Street crosses the river. Let's see if I can exit out of this. There we go. So the sum total of that is that Mount Pleasant was actually sited at the middle of one of these 1 mile square grids in the 1837 Northwest Survey, which makes you a little bit unique. And it created sort of a story where the main through route for traffic going north from Lansing ended up being on Mission Street, which was in those days the far eastern boundary of Mount Pleasant. And that, of course, became US 27 back when the highways were numbered, back when we created a numbered highway system. And I'll move forward and show you a map from the early 1930s that displays that. It also displays that M20 actually ran through the middle of Mount Pleasant, through the middle of downtown on Broadway Street. And as you can see, it jogged south and exited Mount Pleasant to the west on Remus Road as it does today. But for many years, sort of the main route through town for east-west traffic was along Broadway. And I know we've had many discussions throughout the planning process about another reroute of M20 to sort of take that east-west through traffic away from the center of town. M20 was then rerouted along High Street in the 1930s. And it's remained there today. But of course, High Street was not as intensely developed back in those days. Here we can see a photograph of Broadway looking east. This is about in the 1930s. And what you can see is a very densely sort of downtown, very traditional downtown Main Street environment for the 1930s. It was the center of activity. And if we move forward into the 1950s, it remained the center of activity. Pretty much all of the retail uses, all of the major, civic attractions were situated here. And again, Mission Street was still sort of the road on the edge of town. And there were some highway-oriented businesses that were beginning to develop by the 1950s for through traffic on what was called US 27. That time, it's today US 127. But for the most part, the nucleus of activity was downtown. And this is where we get into sort of the main theme that I wanted to hit on, right, which is that plans do have consequences. By the 1940s, 1950s, we got into an era of planning, architecture, design that, just sort of as an umbrella term is called modernism. And under modernist planning principles, the idea was we were going to, sort of open up our communities. We were going to separate land uses as much as possible. And we're going to build everything around the automobile. The automobile was going to be our main primary conduit of travel. Not even necessarily, the idea that we were going to walk somewhere on foot. That seemed sort of outmoded in the post-World War II years. And so by 1964, or by the late 1950s, actually, you can see sort of the change in downtown. This is a photograph of Jockey Alley, as it's known. And a few slides back, I had a photograph of it, stacked in about 1913 with horse and carriages. That had been overtaken by the automobile, of course, by the late 1950s. And like many communities, or most communities around the United States, it was decided that sort of planning should be very auto-centric going into the 1960s. Now, there was a big sort of push for this on the federal level as well. And the federal government really heavily incentivized communities to do single-use zoning and to do very automobile-oriented planning through a number of programs in which they threw a lot of money at local communities. And naturally, local communities were more than happy to acquiesce and take the receipt of those funds, urban renewal just being one of several programs. but the modernist movement also led to a change in architecture. You can't really see the Isabella County Courthouse very well in this picture, but you can see the cupola at the top. And that's the only part that remains. As you're all, I'm sure, very familiar, it sits in the parking lot of the courthouse that was built just a few years after this photograph was taken, which is a very different type of building design. And it was seen as a great leap forward back in the 1950s, 1960s, to sort of take down this outmoded turn of the 20th century courthouse building, with a beautiful civic square and a park surrounding it, and replace it with, sort of a modernist style of office building. So in 1964, Mount Pleasant commissioned or actually I should say in 1960, but the plan was developed by 1964. Mount Pleasant commissioned a very modernist master plan. And this was by a fellow named Scott Bagby and Associates. And Scott Bagby was actually known nationally as sort of an innovator in taking small towns that had up to that point developed in a very traditional style and trying to retrofit the existing street grids to really comport more easily with things like traffic, diverting traffic so that there were, sort of a small number of through routes. Through traffic couldn't use neighborhood streets. And this is a clip from that 1964 plan. And what we can see here is, if I can get my little laser pointer tool. There we go. We can see that these areas of Mount Pleasant hadn't actually been built yet. They were just sort of drawn on there hypothetically, with sort of a much more disconnected street grid, lots of cul-de-sacs. And for the existing historic sort of neighborhood fabric at the core of the city, Bagby proposed these interventions called traffic diverters. And I don't think any of them actually got built in the city, but the idea was that you would take a four-way intersection and you would tie it off so that all traffic had to either make a 90-degree turn, basically to do everything possible to dissuade traffic from circumnavigating through neighborhoods. And as a counterpoint to that, all traffic would sort of be routed on just a few major sort of arterial streets. Now, there's one interesting thing about this 1964 plan. What we can see is that there is a reference to a relocated Highway M20 on here. And maybe if I can zoom in, you can kind of see that. This is something that has gained a lot of traction, was discussed over many successive master plan efforts in the succeeding years, and it's something that we've revisited based on community feedback in this master plan, that it's still something that is there's a desire to study that further, to get traffic that's through traffic, not downtown bound traffic, out of High Street. And this uses the same route, Lincoln, all the way over to Pickard on the west side of town. We can see in this exhibit, you can pretty much look at any map of communities across America, and you can look at a map of Mount Pleasant and basically look at the street network, and you can really get a sense. You can read that street network and see when a particular portion of Mount Pleasant or any community was constructed. And we can see that prior to 1939, we basically built things in grids, and those grids started to break down more and more successively into the 1980s and 1990s, where we had a very disconnected, or what we call a dendritic kind of street network. So these things had been planned. These things had been discussed within the profession beginning in the 1920s and 1930s. They really crept in force into community plans throughout the 1950s and 1960s. And if we look at the progression of development through aerial photographs, we can see how they actually got built. So these things don't happen overnight, but plans do have consequences. Another interesting exhibit to show how plans have consequences is this 1964 downtown plan. Now, most of this did not get built. And as you can see over here, the plan was to take out several blocks of downtown Mount Pleasant centered on Broadway, cover them in parking, and build several sort of suburban style office towers in an office park in the middle of the city. Obviously that did not happen. You can also see that we've got Mission Street here, but Mission Street's been converted into a one-way pair with all sorts of slip roads. The idea being that there would basically be a ring road circling downtown, all one-way streets, all heavily channelized traffic. Now, a very small portion of this did get built, but it didn't go any further than that. And that was what gave us the town center development right at the corner of Broadway in downtown, where you have the semicircular street. This portion of the street was constructed. And as you know, we have a little bit of a plaza and some parking lots there. The one-way pair on going south from that was converted back to two-way traffic in the last decade. And that was the only vestiges of this 1964 downtown plan that actually got built. But what it did was set a precedent for sort of leaving sort of a hole in terms of where there might be, a lack of programmatic activity in the downtown. And that's one of the things that we really heard loud and clear when we were doing, site work and doing activity on our charrette. And so the result of that, you can see this is a picture we took last year of Town Center and what it looks like. And, what could it look like? Paul showed this earlier, this rendering of, the potential of taking some of that parking that now currently occupies that space, turning it into parkland, turning it into more increased public space. And so, you can take something that maybe in retrospect might not have been the best of ideas, or it might have been one idea in a mixed bag of ideas from 50 years ago, and maybe iterate that forward into something that's more resilient and responsive to the needs of a community, today. I mean, that's kind of the purpose of the exercise, and that's kind of the purpose of having a really solid vision backing a master plan. And that's one that I think we really achieved with everybody's enthusiastic participation throughout the process. We can look at some aerial photos. Again, these are exhibits that I think I showed back at the charrette, but you can see how the master plans that Mount Pleasant adopted through the 60s, 70s, and 80s that really reinforced the concept of sort of modernist, car-oriented development and single-family zoning impacted the growth of the community. So in the late 1950s, for example, the CMU campus was a very traditional, walkable campus, a very, very small-scale campus. And it was well integrated with the neighborhoods that bordered it. And you can see this in an aerial view as well. If we move that up to 1980, already we can see the difference that 30 years makes in terms of master plans that reinforce modernist types of development and single-use zoning. Okay, going forwards again. And then lastly, we can move all the way to 2015, where we can see how this has created the environment that we have today, especially as relates to Mission Street. And again, one of the big elements, especially in books 2 and 3 of the plan, is developing a new vision for Mission Street. How will Mission Street evolve going forward? It was basically built to this standard out of greenfields from the 1950s onward. And so it's kind of been handed to you as sort of the current generation and the succeeding generations to iterate that forward and evolve that to maybe a more mixed use, walkable vision rather than just an auto-oriented corridor that is a little bit divisive in terms of trying to get across it safely. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is sort of it's been the elephant in the room up to this point, right? Which is, what about COVID? This has been a real shock to everybody. to have to contend with a global pandemic here in 2020. Obviously, it put off our efforts doing this outreach, and it's made everybody think deeply, about what is the future of cities going to be. And by cities, we don't just mean New York City. We mean cities and towns large and small. If you have had any exposure to national media, and I mean media from all sides, going from publications like the New York Times and the Atlantic all the way over to publications that are more on the conservative side of the spectrum, like a National Review, what you're seeing is the sort of apocalyptic vision that's being played out across all of these articles, that this is going to permanently change human settlement patterns. This is permanently going to change how we live and interact in our daily lives. And I want to take a few moments to put those things that maybe you've been hearing about in your average, sort of media diet. And I want to put those in perspective, and in the perspective of the work that we've accomplished to date in the plan. And I think that if we do that, we'll see that the work that has been put into the master plan actually undergirds the idea that we need to create sustainable and resilient communities that can respond not just to something like the COVID phenomenon, but anything that might come at us in the next 30 or 40 years. And so I want to hit on sort of 4 points, right, related to the pandemic. And point number 1 is, I think we learned firsthand and kind of by surprise that our worlds got smaller. They got a lot smaller, especially during March, April, and into May when we were staying at home all day. And, I know for me and for a lot of other people I've spoken to, this was probably the first time. I would actually say not even when I was a young child and I was being taken everywhere. I mean, this was probably the first time in my life that I had stayed within 1 block of my house for a week to 2 weeks at a time. And I think a lot of other people had that experience. And having that experience really changes your perceptions, right? It changes your perceptions of how you perceive space, how you perceive distance, and even how you perceive time. And I think we've all learned a lot about how these hyper-local areas, and by hyper-local, I don't just mean our neighborhood, what we think of as our neighborhood. I'm thinking down to the level of our block, of our just little portion of the street on which we live, our front yard, our backyard, our neighbor's front yard, our neighbor's backyard. Even just being confined to that area for just a day, 2 days, or going into weeks really makes us perceive those spaces in a totally different way than when we're used to just leaving our houses whenever we want, going wherever we want in a car. And it really does change the way we perceive distances and the way we perceive space. I mean, I know the first time I got in my car and drove to my storage unit, which I live in Ann Arbor, and Ann Arbor isn't an appreciably big city. It's maybe about a 15-minute drive from one side to the other. And that 15-minute drive for me to my storage unit, I mean, it felt like a 45-minute drive. I mean, I thought, what happened to the city? Did it get bigger? Why is it taking so long? And that's kind of gone away now that I'm out and about on a regular basis again. But it's been really interesting to sort of see how it does play tricks on your mind. And, we can look at this slide. This is from an architect named Howard Blackson. And you can look at how it's possible to not just take the element of a neighborhood into account, but you can actually subdivide that neighborhood, into smaller and smaller units, and really, look at it from a really fine-grained perspective. And I think one of the things that we have as a takeaway from the sort of COVID experience and the stay-at-home orders and everything of that nature is we really learned how to look at our neighborhoods again, or our houses, our backyards again, from a really fine-grained perspective. And I think that was kind of channeled. I just saw, where you've got retailers having historic profit losses, and yet you have the Home Depot making, record quarter-over-quarter gains during the second quarter, because people, had nothing else to do. People were taking a newfound interest in, making these improvements to their properties. And so, when we think about this, we can take the objectives that have come out of this planning effort, and we can apply those. When we're thinking about not just our neighborhood, but, really at the micro scale, we can apply these objectives that have been sourced and developed with your input throughout the planning process. So, for example, we look at encouraging redevelopment that locates people within walkable and bikeable distances from essential services, jobs, and recreation. I think that has become sort of more important than ever. Wouldn't it be nice if you weren't fortunate enough to live somewhere where it was not just distance-wise an easy walk, but maybe you'd have to cross Mission Street or something of that nature to get to, you know, a store. That maybe became all that much more apparent when you were you know, confined to your sort of hyper-local area. That plays into encouraging a mix of uses, neighborhood scale business development to serve residential areas and not supplant but complement Mission Street and downtown. Here's another one, improving pedestrian access and walkability through the design of the public realm. And we'll get into that here in a little bit. And of course, you know, achieving those greater connections between downtown and surrounding neighborhoods and within surrounding neighborhoods and parks. And so, you know, if we go back here, you can look at this diagram and actually see, this is sort of an idealized concept, but you can see, you know, this is sort of the bones of a really fine-grained, interconnected series of neighborhoods that are subdivided and have all of these mechanisms built into them. The next thing, point number 2, all right, for businesses and for public life to survive, our spaces must be able to adapt. I think you've had in Mount Pleasant, a very successful, what we call a streetery. I think that's kind of becoming the official terminology, set up on Broadway. And this is just a photograph of one that took this in North Carolina. There's actually one just 2 blocks away from McKinnis headquarters as well in Northville. Communities really had their hands forced. And this might sort of be the silver lining, you know, in the COVID cloud, in that they were really forced to try this, you know, with restaurants now having, you know, pretty much overnight were closed down, and then once reopened, having to operate at much reduced capacity limits for, you know, at this point, an indefinite period of time. You know, we're looking at ways to, you know, maximize how many people can safely, you know, sort of a social distance dine, but in a pleasurable social environment. We're social creatures. We're meant to be outside. We're meant to enjoy public spaces. But, you know, going back to the modernist concept that I talked about, you know, one part of modernism was that everything had to be designed as a single use sort of inflexible object. So, you know, a street was made for cars to drive up and down. Sidewalks were made for people to walk on. You know, shopping malls, retail strips, those were all made for one purpose, and they were designed for that purpose, and they did it really well. But when it came time to adapt, things started to fall apart. We're already seeing that, for example, with shopping malls, right? Once the anchor stores, you know, JCPenney, Sears, et cetera, have gone into financial decline and now into bankruptcy, that whole model that undergirds, you know, the traditional shopping mall is falling apart. And it's no different with our streets. It's no different with our public spaces. One of the things that we can look at and really, I think, is a strong point of the 2050 plan for Mount Pleasant is that, you know, we can have the, you know, basis in policy to make our public spaces, you know, easily adaptable for whatever comes our way. So having the streetery concept be readily available to us is just one application of this. And here you can see a street that was really just designed to be a traditional sort of street with a sidewalk, a planning strip, and then travel lanes. Now you can see the diner spilling over into that street. But, you know, when it comes time to reconstruct a street, for example, maybe we want to think about doing it in a way that maybe lessens the delineation between the curb and the sidewalk. There are all sorts of things that we can program into this. And we can see that, you know, many people have been thinking about how to design public spaces more permanently for not just outdoor dining, but, you know, safe distancing but still carrying the same number of pedestrians and shoppers, also carrying vehicles, potentially carrying farmers market stalls, you know, any number of potential options. But this is this is responsive, in the plan. So, we want to talk about culturally sensitive, responsive, sustainable, and accessible site design. That's one of our objectives. Obviously, we want to promote that vital mix of businesses and uses in downtown. And I think part of that now is directly related to how we design the public spaces outside of it that allows people to access those businesses. And then, of course, pedestrian access and walkability as well. Another thing that's not in the objectives, but a picture is worth 1,000 words, and that is the street typologies that you'll find in Book 2 of the plan. This is just one example of several different street typologies, and these play into the future transportation plan as well, where you'll see, and Chris will show you in the tour in just a few moments, different street designs coded onto that transportation plan. This is another example of how we're not just planning for streets that are not necessarily dominated by automobiles, that are a little bit more friendly to users of all modes, but can be adaptable and easily or more easily reconfigurable based on changing circumstances. And that's something that's very resilient. And so, speaking of resiliency, we want to talk, my third point, I guess, is that there are two ways to look at this. Density does not equal danger. This is something that we've been hearing a lot about, especially in the context of New York. Another way to say this is the city is not a tree. And, what do I mean by this? This is a great diagram. These three depictions of either buildings or a cluster of dwelling units all have the same density. The same number of people live in each of these three squares. But if you look at the red lines, you can definitely see a difference between how movement patterns work within these buildings. So if you look at the high-rise type building there on the upper left, you can see that sort of everyone who accesses the building does it through a limited number of, street entrances. They access through the same, shared corridors, elevator shaft, everything like that to get to their individual units. But of course, you can accommodate the same number of households in a way that doesn't have that builds in a little bit more resiliency. It gives people more space. It gives them common space to share. But it also prevents them from, having to share the same pathways. And so I think in the, context of a pandemic or of COVID, I think that's a very important distinction to make, that to just say that, we all need to live in, sort of single family houses on large lots. That's not the only way to, have sort of a civic life and ensure safe distancing. It can be done with a variety of designs. And I think when we talk about the missing middle housing concepts in Book 1 of the plan, we get into that a lot. The fact that the draft plan is responsive to a number of different housing types, and they don't necessarily mean that we're all going to be, sharing crowded elevators, for example. So we've got some objectives that play into this as well. And in the interest of time, I won't go through all of these, but I'll also say that, city not being a tree doesn't just necessarily mean that, when you think of a tree, we're thinking of a trunk and branches, right? We're thinking of a really pattern of either movement or of development that, works really well for one purpose, but kind of breaks down when one condition changes. And it's the same way with land use. When you look at this diagram, you may have seen this before. It shows on the bottom, you can see a sort of a more traditional interconnected system of streets. And on the top, you can see the sort of modernist style of planning, which is disconnected land uses and sort of a dendritic street network. And again, I think the plan is responsive to this in terms of kind of preserving the things that are good about Mount Pleasant's traditional grid of streets, retrofitting that to provide safe accommodations, and encouraging a mix of uses and sort of walkable and bikeable redevelopment. And all of that is a lot more resilient than saying, well, we can only do one thing that's only accessible by the private vehicle. And then lastly, point number 4, and I alluded to this, was housing types. As conditions change, one of those things is that a new opportunity is that Mount Pleasant could attract a variety of people due to its location in the state that are newly able to work from home. In which case, what housing types are going to be desirable or more responsive to their needs? We've talked about that a lot in terms of demographics shifting, existing residents either wanting to age in place in the community, or younger residents that moved here to go to college and then hopefully stay in the community to get a job, desiring maybe a different housing type than what's currently on offer. But we also want to lay the groundwork for when we think about 30 years into the future. What are some other housing types or trends that maybe we haven't even thought of yet? Well, I'm showing you one in particular that I found very interesting. That's been forwarded this summer in a number of different presentations by a fellow named Andreas Dwani. And this is sort of a take on the sort of housing pattern that you could see if you were an archaeologist and you looked at ancient Pompeii or some of the ancient Mesopotamian cities, where individual clusters of households lived in individual blocks, and then those blocks were aggregated together to make larger neighborhoods. So he calls these nesting compounds, and this may be a little too far out, but in the context of really trying to maintain social bubbles and social distancing, this is one solution that's been put forward. And again, I'm not showing this to suggest that this is the future direction of where Mount Pleasant's housing is going to go, but I'm putting it out there to show that there are all sorts of different concepts that may come forward in the succeeding years that are responsive to changing conditions. And we want to have the basis to think about these, flexibly and openly and creatively, and not just have a plan that only allows us to do one thing that was designed for one particular point in time. And so again, we've got some objectives that play into that. And I would encourage all of you watching, as you review our draft master plan, to please keep your eye on those goals and objectives and try to make those same connections. I'm sure there are many more connections that you'll be able to make as you read the plan. Again, we'll show you how to use the interactive web tool, and we would appreciate your comments and your feedback on that. And so I think I'm right about on time, and I will turn this back over to Paul, and we can move forward with the presentation. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Adam. Really fantastic summary there. I enjoyed listening to you speak through your ideas. I know we talk about this all the time, these types of things, but good job connecting the dots for everyone. So thank you. And actually, I'm only chiming in here for a minute because Chris is going to do the tour. Chris, are you ready?
Yep. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to kick Paul's screen off here. And what I'm going to share with you is something that many of you have probably already seen. I'm going to ask my colleagues to confirm they can see the website here, so I know we're on track. So many of you have already seen this website. In fact, a number of you probably, or all of you, may have come to this webinar through this. And this is, of course, the homepage for the Mount Pleasant 2050 plan. You may have noticed as you arrived at the webinar tonight, linked here, that there was a link immediately below that to the interactive website. And what this website allows you to do is really explore the full draft plan in a way that allows you to focus in on the topic that maybe you're most interested in, allows you to provide comments and feedback, allows you to dive deeply into some of the mapping, and allows you to explore topics outside of the plan that are addressed in the plan specific to Mount Pleasant, but maybe you find interesting and you'd like to know more about X, Y, or Z planning topic, or maybe explore how it's going to, how it could impact Mount Pleasant in a given way. So when you come to the homepage here of the interactive website, you can see all all 6 books of the plan, 0 through 5, and you can choose which book you want to dive into. For our purposes tonight, we're going to look at book 1, just as an example. So you click there, as you can see, as we scroll down here, and you can see the scroll bar at the top loading. We are looking at.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah.
Just chiming in. I think can you just double check your screen share, because I'm not seeing the tour.
Okay. Let's try this again. My screen share is paused. It says. Let's try again. Stop share. Screen share. How's that?
All right, I can see it now.
Okay. So can everyone see my cursor? Paul, can you see my cursor moving around? Dancing?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. All right, I think we're back on track. So I'm going to go back one step, just in case everyone missed that. So when you click on the interactive website link here on the homepage, it brings you to this page. And let me just confirm, the websites are moving. Everyone can see that now?
I can see it. Yes, Chris.
Okay. All right, now back on track. And you can see the 6 books in the plan, 0 through 5. Each of these has its own interactive subsection. For the purposes of tonight, like I said, we're going to look at book 1. So this is going to load up for us. And what you're going to see, once it loads up, is the actual plan document. You can see a PDF. And we're also looking at the various tools that we have available to help you navigate. One of them is this guided tour. Pops up when you come into each book. Also accessible through the little green button that'll appear if this is gone. And what this will do, if you hit next, is it'll jump you to various key passages throughout the book, so that rather than, if you don't want to read every word, this will hit the key highlights. For instance, in this particular book, which regards future land use, as Paul described, this is going to explain future land use and explain the categories that go on the map. But for now, we're actually going to click out of the guided tour and start scrolling through. So if you wanted to read the book cover to cover, that's also perfectly acceptable. And as you scroll through, you notice that we've added these blue dots. And what these do is they can take you off-site to additional information. For instance, this one on the future land use page here could take you to the zoning ordinance. So if you read something on this and you think, well, future land use, that ties to zoning, right? So what is it that this category is going to do when it actually looks like a zoning district? You can go to the actual Mount Pleasant zoning ordinance and review that with one click of the button here from the interactive page. Also, as you scroll through, you see on the left a number of buttons. I'll address each of them at some point, but this one with the speech bubble is what I'm going to talk about first. This is the comment bubble. If you click on this, this will ask for a little bit of contact information and, of course, your comment. Now, the reason we're asking for contact information is because we're seeing this as a two-way conversation. So we want to know who we're talking to and what feedback you're giving so we can respond accordingly. So that's why that is. The other cool thing about this comment feature is it'll actually tag to the page you were on when you pushed comment. That way our team and the city team can figure out what comments are addressing what aspect of the document. As we continue to scroll here, you'll notice again on the left, there's this star. I was wiggling for you. This star at the bottom, and this says view the goals and objectives for sustainable land use. Now the goals and objectives, which are, to summarize, the statements of what it is the plan seeks to accomplish over the course of the life of the plan. These are our guiding principles, basically. Those are actually found in book 0. But within those guiding principles, there are things that apply to each of the various other books. So what you can do is you can click here, and what this will pop up is just one single page from book 0 that tells you the goals and objectives that are related, in this case, to land use. So without having to go back to book 0, scroll through it, now you just pop up this one particular page and you can read anything you may be interested in there. As we continue to scroll here, and pages pop up, we are going to arrive at the future land use map. Of course, this is one of the key aspects of the plan. Scroll so you can see it. There you go. So one of the key aspects of the plan. This is your citywide map of future land development. This ties directly to zoning. This is our vision for what the city is going to look like as private development occurs and investment occurs, over the next couple of decades. But what we're looking at here, of course, is just a static PDF. It's great, shows you the whole city, but what if you want to explore it in a little more detail? Well, we got a couple buttons, two different ways to get to the same thing. This one here and this one here will take you to the interactive future land use map. So as we click that, this is going to pop up, and we're going to come up to this pop-up, which has some instructions at the top, but I'll scroll down and I'll show them. It's going to load up here. A map that is, first off, a couple things about it. First, you can see that there's an aerial photo underneath. So you can take a look at what does the city look like above, what is actually there now, and compare that to the future land use underneath. This map also has a search function. So say I was to search for 101 East Broadway. So that's right in the center of town. And that'll zoom in, and we can click on 101 East Broadway. And that will give us, I hope you can see this because on my screen it's a little bit squished, but this will give us the future land use category for that particular property. You can also scroll over on this map, you can zoom in, you can zoom out. And this obviously works better on a little larger screen. The other thing that this map does is as you scroll down, it gives you these little vignette descriptions of each of the future land use categories, just summaries, etc. And while you do that, the map actually zooms and recenters and highlights that category. So as you can see, attached residential is currently being highlighted in blue. You can see that throughout the city, and as we keep scrolling, additional categories will pop up. And as you look through it, you can zoom, you can search, and this allows you to really explore the map in a lot more detail than just that PDF allows you. There's another interactive map on the website. This is the future transportation plan. This pops up, and this is similar to the future land use map, except that instead of talking about private property, we're now talking about roads. And I apologize here. The building I'm in right now is across the street from the Grand Rapids Fire Department. So occasionally we get the sirens. Hope everyone can still hear me. Anyway, the future transportation plan highlights each of the major roads in the city and gives them a category which pertains to their future character, their use within the system, the important modes of travel that happen on them, the way they connect to other roads, etc. And that's, of course, described in the categories below as we scroll, similar to the other map. Also similar to the other map, you can zoom, you can pan, and you can click on a road, say High Street, and that'll give you the type of road, multimodal avenue. And then you can scroll down to what exactly that means. There's a little more information below. So that's a different way of exploring the plan. It allows you to be interactive and really dive into these maps. So hopefully you can enjoy that and provide some comments. As we continue to move through the document here, I do want to call attention to these little eyes. And these I think are pretty cool because this goes to some of the concepts Adam was talking about. Some of these planning concepts, the plan describes them in specific terms of how they might be applied in a given neighborhood in the city of Mount Pleasant. But if you click on these eyes, you can see that you can learn more about missing middle housing. So if I click here, this will take me off the Mount Pleasant plan page into missingmiddlehousing.com, which is a real website, which will explain the different types of missing middle housing, what it is, why maybe it's an important aspect of the housing market that's been neglected, and how it can fit into a neighborhood. So that's just one example of these little eye buttons that are throughout the document. You can see more on this page. These will give you more information about specific housing types. And another button that's throughout the document that I want to bring your attention to as we scroll down here is these with the little Google Street View guy on them. And what these do is they tend to appear in areas where we've got a case study from another community that is demonstrating a concept that the plan is recommending for Mount Pleasant or a portion of the city. So if I click here, what will pop up is a Google Street View of a neighborhood section in Grand Rapids. And this is demonstrating the concept that this building in front of us reflects, which is the way the storefronts are designed, the roof-shot storefront, and the way the sidewalk interacts with them, with the bike path, et cetera. So, excuse me, with the bike racks, et cetera. So with different concepts, You can kind of explore, you can walk around those other communities, see what those neighborhoods are like, see why maybe they were highlighted. They're not all positive examples. This one right here is Novi, right off I-96 in the Detroit area, where some of you may be familiar with, where there was an attempt to build some sort of downtown, but all the buildings are facing away from the street, so you're looking at the backs of the buildings and no parking. So kind of the worst of both worlds. So these are the areas you can explore that to talk about the good, the bad, and how things might apply in Mount Pleasant future. We're going to reach the end here of book 1, and I'm going to show you a few other things we've got. As you reach the end of a book, there are navigation buttons here on the left that can jump you to the next book or the previous book. You have another button here that can jump you to the zoning ordinance or the zoning map if those are relevant to your interests. And you also have this button, which takes you to the survey, which Paul mentioned earlier, which is a little more broad and asks questions, looks for your feedback on specific topics, as opposed to the comment button, which is just whatever you might, whatever feedback you might want to give on a given section of the plan. If you are interested in taking the survey, you don't have to scroll all the way to the bottom of a book to do it. There's also a link right here. And with that, I will turn it back over to Paul, who can have his screen back, to take our next step.
Thank you, Chris. Let's see here. So actually, again, we're kind of reaching to the close of our time. We plan to conclude at 8:30, and we got about 15 minutes left, which is perfect because the last thing we had on our agenda this evening was questions. So Laura's going to facilitate our Q&A. And Laura, while you do this, I'm going to keep my eye to see if anyone's asking or writing questions. Okay.
Great, thank you, Paul. And thanks for that demo, Chris. Laura Haw with McKenna. I know that was a lot of information to digest, and that's why we really wanted to make sure that we give an opportunity for the public to ask questions tonight and provide any feedback. Just logistically, there's 2 ways that you can ask questions tonight. You can either type a question in the chat, and then we'll read it out loud, or if you would prefer to speak, feel free to raise your hand through Zoom, either using the raise hand button, or if you're calling in from a mobile phone, just press *9, and then I'll either call on you by your Zoom name or the last 4 digits of your phone number. And I'd like to open the floor for any questions. All questions are welcome. They can be on the future land use map, park and rec projects, Mission Street, or even the process itself.
Hey, Laura, should we get started with the discussion with a little Zoom poll?
Sure, Paul.
All right, I'm going to relaunch the Zoom poll that I started at the beginning.
Okay, this question is, what about the experience of the pandemic made you especially appreciative that you live in Mount Pleasant? And this is kind of just to get thoughts rolling. For many of us, the pandemic meant more time at home, more time in our neighborhoods, and more time to enjoy parks and rec in our communities. But also, this experience, while it highlighted what our assets, it also kind of made really apparent what could be improved. So it looks like about half of the group has voted. We'll give it just a second more.
Looks like we got about 11 of 16 people here. You want to share the results?
Yeah, so the top choice that most participants identified with is the access to green and open spaces within walking or biking distance. And this is something that Adam had touched on earlier, just the importance of having those assets in the community and the ability to connect and reach those safely. It looks like we have a question from Tyler, so I'm going to give the floor to you.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so I had just a couple of questions. One that might be maybe too specific for this, but I'll ask it anyway, and then another one that maybe is more general. The specific question is, there's a lot of focus on mission, which I think is great, the rerouting of M20, which is great, but I had a question specifically related to Bellows Street that borders campus, because there's a lot of what I'll term blight in that area that I just looks particularly bad. And I don't know if that's on anybody's sort of radar to look at and figure out how to maybe reuse that space. Maybe that ties into the mixed use or the missing middle or whatever, but just something to throw out. And the second question, more general, was, so each iteration of a master plan has, different goals and objectives, right? So we looked at the plan from, I think it was 1964 or whatever the year was. And it was mentioned that there were aspects of the plan that were partially built and then a lot of it wasn't built. And so then we have this plan and, we had the previous plan. So I wonder how do all of these master plans kind of take into account avoiding kind of a mishmash of plans? Because, like with the 1964 plan, you built some of it. And for example, the one-way directions on Washington and Maine, how that lingered for many decades afterward. And then, we progress in another plan and we kind of go in a different direction. And then we do that for 10, 15, 20 years. And then we go in a different direction 20 years later. And then we end up with all this sort of hodgepodge. So how do we kind of account for that? Or how do we avoid that maybe? Or what kinds of things, do we look at with that when we develop these plans?
Sure, Tyler, those are both great questions. I think we can maybe start with the more general one first.
Sure.
So, as the community goes through the master plan process, there's an important component of that is the analysis and understanding what the current conditions and forecasts are. And that kind of helps shape the potential and those policies. But also the community engagement portion of the process really helps define and shape those. And that of course changes over time. These plans are meant to be long range in nature. As you can tell, the last one was from 2014. So they are intended to be flexible and based on the character that the community really envisions. Adam, did you want to add anything since you spoke about the history earlier?
Sure. Thanks, Laura. Yeah, Tyler, I'm happy to chime in a little bit about that. One of the things about master planning is that, and I think we moved away from it, from the maybe 1970s through the early 2000s. But I think this plan really does capture is that, master planning should be a visionary process. And, this is something that, it really involves not only, creating a really sound, high quality vision for different aspects of the community as well as, the community as a whole, but it's getting that vision out into the community at large. So it's going to involve you and your neighbors and, everyone really taking the time to, look at what's in this plan, internalize it, and then you have to be the salespeople to sell it to your fellow community members in your social circles, all of the different people you interact with. And I think that's one of the things that we were able to achieve with such a really good, as Laura mentioned, public outreach process, is that we have a plan that has really broad consensus-based buy-in across a lot of different segments of the community. And what we want to do now is we want to be able to have it in a format that is, not only, fun and easy to read, it's something that you can share with, and you don't need to be sort of, a technical nerd like maybe we are to really be able to communicate what this vision is. Because, this is 2050. I mean, this is 30 years from now, and, all of us don't want to really imagine being 30 years older, but it's going to happen. And, there's going to be people that are just being born this year in 2020 that are going to be graduated from college, going to, be starting families, have their careers blossoming, and hopefully be the next generation of community leaders in Mount Pleasant in 2050. So it's up to us now to communicate that vision all the way down to our kids, to our grandkids, to successive generations. And that's something that really we kind of forgot about how to do well, I would say, over the last 40 or 50 years. And that's not just maybe in Mount Pleasant, but that's more generally as a profession. So that would be the advice that I have, is really get to know this plan. And we're here, Jacob, and your elected and appointed officials are here too, to help communicate that vision moving forward. And Laura, don't forget, there's also the 5-year master plan review process as well. That's a really big component of that. That's in our Planning Enabling Act at the state level. That is kind of a check on that as well.
Adam, very awesome job at talking about the kind of long-term vision element of master planning. I'm going to address the bellows part of the question and kind of relate that back to the specific plan. So, one of the things I love about planning is, like, great ideas tend to stick around, right? And you never know when the day is going to come, or, it's day and the sun is going to happen. And a bunch of those ideas that Adam presented, some of them, seemed a little bit more far-fetched in the past, did get implemented, but some of them didn't, and they're in this plan. As well as kind of the best idea, or our best idea about the vision for today, is in the plan. And I think today you've heard a lot about that policy framework, how our approach to developing new goals and objectives for the city integrate those physical design ideas, as well as some of the design ideas that get implemented through regulation. But specifically related to bellows, kind of want to share how some of those ideas are integrated in the concepts of the plans through the relationship of the mapping of our future land use recommendations with the transportation networks and tying back to the objectives. So I'm going to go back to that virtual website that, or the interactive website that Chris toured you through, and look specifically at the connectivity plan, because I think this is a really good plan that kind of illustrates how we recognize that important connection to the era of bellows that you're talking about, which is a really interesting connection. And we've described that as a civic center in the plan, and really a center that relates and is equally spaced between the center, which we're describing on Mission Street, and downtown. And particularly, as I mentioned in my part of the presentation, that access, or the corridor between the University Center and downtown, is a place to connect for walkability. And so I would say that the way that we've presented these recommendations is tying the public realm, the types of design features that we want to see in the public realm, to those places, and then linking those places back into our plans for land use. So there's a relationship between all of these recommendations that are that go through the plan and allow for implementers. And as Adam said, really the city and the residents of the city as implementers to create that vision. Bellows is described in that category of, I believe it's the high mixed use category. Mixed use low. Oh no, sorry, it's the low mixed use category. So we want to build on the vision and the character of the buildings that really just need a little help to come back. All right, I'll turn it back to Laura. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Paul. We have a question that came through the chat. It says, are there hard copies of the draft plan available to the public? So there are hard copies at City Hall that are available to inspect and read. You can also download each of the books from the interactive website as a PDF, and you could print those as well for a hard copy. Are there any other questions? I see one in the chat. Are there pedestrian and safety recommendations in the plan for Mission Street? If yes, what exactly is planned? Paul, do you want to touch on some of those recommendations?
Sure. Yes, I will. And I'll go back to my share screen and look at that interactive transportation map. So as part of I think actually throughout the presentation, you heard a little bit about the objectives for increasing walkability in the city. This map kind of shows that, right? So we've talked about, oh, I hit the wrong button. You know, I'm actually going to go back to this one. We talked about the retrofitting for the different street typologies. And the street typologies provide guidance for the types of things that should be integrated into a modern boulevard, into a thoroughfare retrofit, into these avenues, connector streets. So the idea is that each of these street typologies need to prioritize not just the vehicle, but different types of connections and accessibility for biking and walking. Additionally, we looked at the network to define areas where multimodal intersections, so places where we need to prioritize crossing, particularly on Mission Street. You know, one of the things is to address that connection to the park system between the east and west sides of the cities by providing more regular intersections that are designed to prioritize safe crossings. And then this idea of a system of roundabouts is described in the plan. But very importantly, it's worth noting that it's possible to design a roundabout that is good for pedestrians, and it's possible to design a roundabout that is not good for pedestrians. So the plan sets objectives to make sure that transportation improvements are designed to prioritize accessibility for all modes in the system.
Great, thanks, Paul. Well, thank you for those who had questions, and just know that if you have follow-up questions and after going through the website and reviewing the plan, that McKenna and the city are happy to answer any further questions that you have, and our contact information is on the website. We are hitting our timeline, so I want to turn it over to Paul to just brief everyone on next steps. Thanks.
Thanks, Laura. I'm going to go back to our presentation here and let me go into presentation view first, and then screen share. So for next steps, we talked a little bit about this at the beginning. We're here. We've completed the 63-day public review period. Most of the comments we received, I would characterize as being very positive. We're happy that people have taken the time to review the plan and provide comments during that period. And also very appreciative of the City Commission and Planning Commission, the Parks Commission, and the DDA for really taking the time to invest in this process, developing this website and reaching back out to make sure that everyone who wants to have an opportunity to provide feedback in this process has that opportunity. So as part of that, following this period, we're going to outreach to Planning Commission, City Commission, and Parks Commission to confirm and share the feedback that we received during the 63-day review period, and then during this month of additional comments and outreach to cities conducted. We have concluded our 63-day comment period that ran through, actually started in December of last year, or shortly thereafter, and ran through April. As Jacob mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we had planned to do a series of outreach activities in April, and we delayed them for the last several months before regrouping to do this outreach. We still do need to go back for public hearings rather than being in the winter and spring. I think the actual schedule was at the beginning, so I'm going to actually go back to the schedule we presented at the beginning of the presentation, which has those meeting dates in it. If you pause for a second. So going back, the web tool is available through August 31st. We are actually we've moved into target dates for the public hearings now. And we're targeting September 22nd for the Parks and Recreation public hearing, followed by a Planning Commission public hearing on October 1st. Both of those public hearings are required as part of the process for adopting both the parks component of this plan and the master plan component of this plan. And then tentatively, based on the results of those hearings, we believe and we are targeting scheduling a final public hearing and adoption at the City Commission on November 9th. So please do take time to take our survey. If you don't have time to take the survey this evening, when you click out of this webinar, come back and take it in a little bit. It will be up through the 31st, and we would like to hear your more specific feedback on that, that part of our plan. And take some time to read the plan, to work through the web tool that we've developed and experience it. What we want to do is develop a flexible plan that can really serve to anticipate potential changes, changes like the pandemic response that we're working through now, and have policies that are valid both to the things that we've foreseen and the goals that we've developed, as well as the things that we don't know, the things that residents in Mount Pleasant tomorrow will be dealing with and looking to work with to create the city that they want to live in. So thank you. I'm really happy with what we've done. I want to give Jacob an opportunity to quickly chime in here and thank people as well. Jacob?
Thanks, Paul. As they've said, we're very appreciative of our community and your participation. As we learned early in this presentation tonight, many of you have been participating with us for the better part of the last 18 months in getting to tonight's presentation and moving into this public hearing process. Going back to one of the questions that was posed earlier about the plans and what happens next, implementation is obviously going to be taking place over the course of several years, and successful implementation is going to depend on public support for the ideas in the plan and public support through the work that comes after this. So the plan gives us a vision for the future. There are many steps that still have to take place in order to achieve that vision, and so we hope you'll remain engaged in this plan, particularly if there are things of this plan you support and want to see come to fruition in our community in the future. Please stay engaged with us. Please participate. Please let your elected and appointed officials know what matters to you and what you want to see come to fruition. And then we'll do everything we can to make sure that we're able to do that. So thank you again for taking the time tonight to join us. Thanks to McKenna for putting together a great presentation tonight. We hope many of you will take advantage of the virtual options that are available through the 31st, and we'll look forward to moving forward to adoption later this fall.
Thanks, Jacob, and thanks to the team for the performance tonight. Chris, Laura, and Adam, excellent job. Jacob, excellent job. Thanks again to our members of the city and the public for coming out. We're going to try to post this webinar on the website as well. So if your friends, family didn't get an opportunity to come out tonight, If you found the information useful, share it with them. Let them know that we're going to have this available for them to watch as well. So thanks, everybody.
Bye.